Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. The Dead Sea Scrolls have long captured the public interest. The scrolls were found in 1947 by an Arab shepherd boy in a cave near the Dead Sea, hence their name. The scrolls, of course, were immediately linked to the ruins of the ancient settlement at Qumran that is just adjacent to the Dead Sea. Now, since the occupation of that settlement overlaps, at least a little bit, with the period of Jesus and the disciples, some researchers, even to the present day, presume that Jesus must have been a member of that community, the Essene community. Specifically, the sect's leader, the teacher of righteousness, is identified as or with Jesus. Now, is there anything to this? Well, let's find out. Now, today in the world of biblical studies scholarship and Second Temple Judaism scholarship, the overwhelming consensus is that Jesus was not an Essene. You can frankly count on one hand the number of scholars, credentialed people, who would think otherwise. The same is true of John the Baptist. He's also identified by a handful of people as being a member of the Essene community. But most scholars would reject that idea completely. So why the consensus? Well, though the occupation of the Qumran community overlaps with the time of Jesus and the apostles to some extent, that overlap comes at the end of the Qumran settlement's occupation. The teacher of righteousness was the community's founder. He was there long before the time of Jesus by Qumran's own chronology. In other words, the major disconnection is, in fact, the chronology of the community's own history. That chronology is established by dating the scrolls, which is in turn established by carbon-14 dating and paleographical analysis linked to the scrolls that have datable events in them. Let's talk about paleography for a little bit. That's referring to handwriting styles. Now, each scroll, of course, was written by hand. When handwriting styles are similar in scrolls, scholars logically group those scrolls together, perhaps by the same hand, or maybe someone trained by the same teacher. Letter formation is actually fairly uniform, although scholars have worked out a typology, how the letter formation differs from hand to hand in the slightest of details. Scribal hands were very much alike, but not completely alike. There are changes and, again, distinctive habits. Scholars have been able to take the scrolls and analyze the handwriting style and produce a typology, a chronological typology, linked to the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially the ones that have datable events within them. Then the paleography gets cross-checked with carbon-14 and vice versa. So the Qumran chronology, the Essene chronology, is not just based on one approach, one scientific mechanism. It's actually cross-checkable. And there are other confirmations using other scientific dating techniques as well that confirm the consensus view, specifically the consensus chronology, which rules out a link between the teacher of righteousness and Jesus. Nevertheless, a handful of scholars do disagree, and some for very strange reasons. At the heart of the idea that Jesus was an Essene is the rejection of the consensus chronology produced by dating the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, this is absolutely essential to making Jesus an Essene. Unfortunately, the arguments put forth to identify Jesus as an Essene are very idiosyncratic, even to the point of being contrived. I'm going to give you two brief examples and refer you to the sources on our companion webpage for this episode, where there's a lot more argumentation and a lot more detail. The first example would be Robert Eisenman. Now, Eisenman rejects the consensus dating, again, because he has to unite the Dead Sea Scroll leader to Jesus. He argued that one scroll, 4Q285, told the story of a crucified Messiah. A series of carbon-14 studies by 3 independent laboratories have confirmed the dating of the scrolls with datable events, including that scroll used by Eisenman. so it is chronologically out of place with respect to Jesus. Eisenman then mounted his own carbon-14 study, but subsequent published research demonstrated that his methods and their results were flawed. In other words, he sort of gamed the system by creating his own study to validate his own conclusion. Second example would be Barbara Thiering. She's an Australian, and her views, I have to be honest with you, are considered bizarre by peers. I've actually had scholars at scholarly meetings use words like that of Thiering's research. Now, she believes that she has discovered a code by which she can decrypt the real meaning of the scrolls and the New Testament. The result is basically that nothing in the New Testament Gospels means what it says, and only Thiering knows their true meaning by virtue of her decoding technique. Jesus, she says, was not the teacher of righteousness, but his opponent, the wicked priest. Now, two longtime scrolls specialists, James Vanderkam and Peter Flint, had this to say about Thiering's research, quote, "Thiering's reconstruction of Jesus' life can only be described as eccentric or bizarre, reading into the Gospels material that is simply not there. Jesus marries Mary Magdalene twice. He's crucified near the Qumran complex but doesn't die. His unconscious body is placed in Cave 8, and he later lives out his days in Rome as an old man," unquote. So was Jesus an Essene? Well, the short answer is no. There are good reasons why the academic consensus is what it is. And these are not all confessional scholars, scholars who would call themselves Christians or even believers in God or Jews of any stripe. The academic consensus rejects the equation for a number of good reasons. Now, we've already talked about sort of the negative side of this, the unusual, to say the least, efforts of Eisenman and Barbara Thiering and why they have been rejected. But there are other problems as well. First, Jesus, and so the New Testament writers, did not have to be part of the Qumran community to know about the sect. Their presence in the desert by the Dead Sea, their lifestyle, and their beliefs were discussed in contemporary sources such as the writings of Philo and Josephus. Second, though there are parallels between the two figures and between certain things in the New Testament and the Qumran community, the chronology disconnects them firmly. But again, since the community was in close proximity to Jerusalem and some of the other cities that we see in the New Testament, it would be kind of shocking if there was nothing mentioned in the New Testament that sounded similar to something at the Qumran community. If Jesus was the teacher of righteousness, he would have to be 200 years old in the New Testament gospel accounts. The chronology just doesn't work out. Not only that, but there are things that the Essene community taught, and we can read about that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that are diametrically opposed to things that Jesus taught in the Gospels and other New Testament writers taught. There is just not a very good alignment. And so that problem, that's really the third problem, is kind of the one that kills the idea in the academic community. The teacher of righteousness, for instance, was not crucified. Jesus was. The teacher saw salvation by works in the law, by obedience to Torah. Again, the New Testament clearly does not teach that idea. It does not teach salvation by works. Jesus' teaching about the kingdom of God and the gospel are never part of the teacher's theology. The teacher of righteousness never mentions these ideas, but they are fundamental and foundational to what Jesus says in the Gospels. And we could go on, and again, I recommend viewers go to the resources on the companion webpage for this episode. There are so many disconnects between Jesus and the New Testament doctrines and the Qumran community that the consensus is what it is. Overwhelmingly, scholars reject the idea that Jesus was part of the Essene community. Thanks for watching Fringe Pop 321. Please come back and watch other videos on other topics. And of course, visit our website for good resource material on this topic and any topic that we do here on the YouTube channel. If you'd like to support what we're doing at Fringe Pop, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/FringePop321. And remember, what you know may not be so.